The man is gone, and Mama says that she can't live without him. The man is gone, and Mama says there is no life without him. How can I tell her the way I feel? I'm afraid she'd be hurt and sink. It pisses me off, it drives me mad that she lets herself feel so bad. The man is gone, and Mama says that she can't live without him. The man is gone, Mama says there is no life without him.
Hey everybody, welcome back to week 2 of On the Block Radio. Andy here, and I wanted to spend a few minutes with you before we get to our guest for this week. We had a few audio issues last week for those of you that tuned in for the first program. This is an emerging labor of love for all of us, so thanks for bearing with us while we work out a few bugs. We had the mics a little too close, and in much of the broadcast I sounded like a sort of big encephalitic Jew vampire Darth Vader. I don't know, it was horrifying when I listened back to it, so thanks for listening through all of that. Apologies to Adam Klugman for breathing all over his wisdom. We also had some audio issues with the music that I think we have fixed for this week, so I think you're going to enjoy this week's broadcast for sure. We're looking into installing a new player on the site, a mobile app, maybe a few other opportunities, iTunes, and a few other things to give you more ability to listen to the show at your leisure and on the device of your choosing. So stay with us for that. Looking into Libsyn and, as I said, iTunes and a few others. We'll show up on Google search soon enough if you follow us on Facebook and Twitter and link to our site. That'll help the process along. But you should be able to find us soon enough through doing a simple Google search. Again, it's www.ontheblockradio.com. The show, I'm finding out is a labor of love, but it's not a very inexpensive labor of love. We have hosting fees. I have hosting fees for 3 different sites that I'm paying. I'm buying gear left and right in order to bring you the program. So the show is not cheap to produce. The show will be free as long as I'm doing it, because I want the show to be accessible to anybody that wants to listen to it. When you go onto our website, there's a donate button down at the bottom. If you have the means and see fit, we would love your contributions of any size to help us bring the program to you. If you don't want to contribute to the program or can't, I hope you still listen. If you can, I would love if you would support our guests, the artists, the authors, the musicians that we have on the show, the music that's played during the breaks. If you like this stuff, there's links to all of it in our show notes and on our website. And please do support these artists. If their art matters to you, please support them so they can keep making more of it. The show is about transformation, and I really want to bring programming to you that helps facilitate that. And the stuff doesn't produce itself. It comes from a lot of hard work and sacrifice. So if you hear something you like on the show, track that person down through our site and show them some support by picking up some of their merchandise. And if you don't want to support the podcast, and if you don't want to support the artists on the podcast, consider supporting local artists and voices in your own community, especially those voices that exist on the margins and for one reason or another have been pushed to the side for too long. Support local artists, authors, musicians, storytellers in your community, and watch transformation happen in real time in the world around you. Our guest today is Lidia Yuknavitch. She is the author of several books. The most recent is The Small Backs of Children. There's information about her book and her other work on the site, and we get to it in the interview. The reason I wanted to bring Lidia on the show is the reason I bring the other guests that we have on the show, is that I'm studying transformation. I'm studying how people can do what Lidia says is alchemize the dark. How do we take the pain and suffering that we've experienced, the trauma that many of us have experienced, the trauma we see happening in our world, to the world itself and to other people, and how do we transform that into something valuable? How do we make a self out of that pain, a self that arises out of that experience and yet is still beautiful and claims a heritage and an ownership of itself and its own identity. And Lidia is an author that I think does this remarkably well in her work. I highly recommend you getting over to her site. If you get a chance, take a workshop with her. Pick up one of her books, The Chronology of Water, Dora, A Head Case, The Small Backs of Children. You're going to be amazed at what this woman does. The raw honesty and intensity of her work is mind-boggling. This episode is about the transformation of father energy. If you're a person who had a father that you resonated with, who you were close to, who loved you and who you loved back, and who supported you in the person that you are and the person that you became and the person that you're becoming, then you are blessed. And you should thank the universe and thank the stars that that is so, and you can celebrate that father energy. And the transformation of father energy you celebrate is the transformation of that energy from your father into you and out into the world in a way that honors his sacrifice and his gifts that he's given to you. For the rest of us, there's a different kind of transformation that needs to happen around father energy. A lot of us have connections to father energy that come with a lot of judgment, a lot of stripping of our dignity, a stripping of our safety, stripping away of our own identity. And when we come into the world and are confronted with that violence, that level of immovable rage, it can become very difficult for some of us to come back from that. And many of us don't. Many women don't, but many men don't as well. So this show is about the transformation of father energy, and it's sitting with a person who I think has done that more beautifully and more profoundly than most other people that I've met.
Welcome to On the Block with Andrew Gurovich, a podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
I think we're in a process of evolution in terms of writing female subjectivity, writing female characters that don't suck ass, writing female characters like the women we are and know.
Yeah.
Even though there's lots of cool literature out there behind us and with us, I think we're just starting to ask, what would it mean to write a woman character or a gay character or a person of color character if you stepped 10 steps away from the tradition that has incarcerated them for all of literary history. I think we're just starting that.
As those subjectivities are in desperate need of being explored, the definition of woman isn't staying still.
Right.
for those things to catch up with. It's sort of evolving faster than we haven't even defined, as you said, what it used to mean to be a woman, and now we have a whole new set of things thrown into the mix.
If I was picking a camp today, I would pick the camp that's most interested in agitating all the definitions, and I'm okay with the fluidity and the non-stability of what we mean when we say man, woman, transgender, queer. I'm okay that all those categories are a little bit shivery right now. It's okay with me. I like that idea better, that we might be evolving toward a way of relating to one another and discoursing on the topics with a more fluid set of terms. Maybe we're just done with those terms. I don't know. This new one, intersectionality.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm for it.
Yeah.
Hooray. But that's such a silly word, intersection.
I tried to use it in the intro to the show, and I used it incorrectly, so I had to go edit it out later, because I think I said I wanted the show to be racist and oppressive, and I was trying to say the opposite.
No, you don't want that.
Yeah, no, I don't want that. Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. Welcome to the program, folks. This is our second episode of On the Block Radio. I'm your host, Andy Gurvich, and we are broadcasting today actually from the Lansu Chinese Garden in beautiful downtown Portland, Oregon, and we are at the Tao of Tea. Our guest is Lidia Yuknavitch. Welcome to the show, Lidia.
My pleasure to be here.
Like most things, we did that out of order and began the conversation before the intro. No, that's perfect. I'm looking at the little stand on our table here, and there's a saying written on it. I don't know if you appreciate synchronicities, but I do. And there's something on our table that says, "Our finite nature, the power of tradition and conventionality, as well as our hereditary instincts, restrict the scope of our capacity for artistic enjoyment."
I am so down with that idea.
Yeah, I just think we should turn the mics off now and go home. I don't know of a better way to...
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's important to look at what we inherit, and it's important to have a relationship with traditions and what precedes or comes before. But if it stops you from change or creation, I don't know that that's ever a good idea.
These should be vehicles for the process of one's own becoming. I read a story about the Buddha who was looking at the teachings of Hinduism and contemplative yoga, and some of these things that when you look at them and you teach them kind of in their pure form, they seem like brilliant ideas, and are brilliant ideas. It's kind of the first depth psychology movement is Hinduism. But once, Brahmanism sets in, once hierarchy steps in, once patriarchy steps in, then those traditions become things to limit people's creativity and the identity of self. And he said the mountain that was put in place for people to climb, to do the hard work of reaching their own enlightenment, is now pressing on their backs and keeping them pressed to the ground.
Yeah, and it's a series of veils one has to move through. And I don't know, in American culture in particular, we get stuck so easily. I mean, we get, we learn something and we decide we know something, and our knowledge becomes static, and we get stuck. That's an opinion of just mine.
How do you fight that in your own creativity?
Well, I paint and I draw and I write and I raise my son, and I try to agitate not only for the stuff I care about in the world, but I'm a person who tries to agitate for a fluid, open self, even to myself. Eternally remind myself not to get stuck like that or solidified or static in my possibility of changing. And I fail every day, but it's worth trying anyway.
There's I'm dusting off a very old bookshelf here, but in grad school and a little bit after, I read the work of several literary critics, and it was either Bakhtin or Giambastavico who talked about the importance of play in creativity, but he was very serious about the word play, and it was breaking apart of these previous structures in order to remake oneself. And it was what James Baldwin said at the end of Sonny's Blues, that although we know the story of our history and our tradition and our oppression, we need to retell it to ourselves every generation in new and captivating ways.
And Bakhtin in particular was really important for me too, that his whole notion of the carnivalesque, and even in my personal life and my workspace and my job space, it's an important idea to me to maintain a sense of reactivating the carnivalesque within all systems and pressures and, places where we're told what to do and what to know and how to act.
Is that dangerous to do, not only as an artist, but just as a person?
I think it's vital as an artist. I think if you're not doing that, you're probably just participating in commodity culture, which to me is not being an artist. And I know I catch shit for that, but it's just my opinion.
Remember the Gauguin quote, art is either revolution or plagiarism?
Yep.
Is that Gauguin? I quote things all the time, and then listeners write me and go, that was actually...
Yeah, I don't know if it's Gauguin, but I've heard it before. I don't know if it's Gauguin.
Facebook says it's Gauguin, and Facebook doesn't lie. We all know that. Can I read a little bit of your bio for our audience? Is that all right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you if it has anything to do with me.
With you or not. Yeah. I'm fascinated at what guests think when they hear it, their accomplishments read back to them.
Yeah.
All right. Lidia Yuknavitch is the author of Dora, a Headcase, The Chronology of Water, a memoir, and 3 works of short fiction, Her Other Mouths, Liberty's Excess, and Reel to Reel, as well as a book of literary criticism, Allegories of Violence. Her work has appeared in Ms. Magazine, the Iowa Review. Did I say Ms. right? I said that wrong once and got in a lot of trouble.
No,
I think I said
right.
Miss Magazine, which is the whole
Ms.
point of the magazine, right?
Yeah.
And so, like a jackass male, I fucked up the one thing you're not supposed to. Anyway, back to you. The Iowa Review, Exquisite Corpse, Another Chicago Magazine, Fiction International, Zizova, and elsewhere. Her book Reel to Reel was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award, and she is the recipient of awards and fellowships from poets and writers in literary arts. The Chronology of Water won the Oregon Book Award's Reader's Choice for 2012 and the PNBA Award for 2012, and was a finalist for the 2012 Penn Center USA Creative Nonfiction Award. Her work appears in the anthologies Life as We Show It, Forms at War, and Wreckage of Reason. She teaches writing, literature, and film in women's studies in Oregon in the same hallway that I do. Her new novel, The Small Backs of Children, takes us on a harrowing journey that begins in a war-shattered town in Eastern Europe, where an American photographer captures an image of a young girl blown forward by a blast that kills her entire family. The photographer wins the award, and the girl retreats into anonymity and art, taken in by a widow in her farmhouse. Soon, a group of American artists decide that they need to find this girl and bring her to the United States for reasons that you're going to have to read the book to find out. Packed in around this narrative framework are fractured stories of devotion, art making, sex, power, meditations on love, and the gendered experience, and as always with Yuknavitch, the life of the body. In the New Yorker review of this book, the reviewer says The Small Backs of Children is balanced on a sex, art, death trifecta that has become the Yuknavitch signature. How's it feel to have a signature?
I'll take that particular cross.
Yeah. Your formal experiments attempt, like Kathy Acker's, to communicate extreme emotional states, the intensity of the lived experience. Her books have been described as fever dreams of escape and reinvention.
I like that one.
You like that one?
Yeah.
I have no idea who described that.
I just like it.
I read recently in a review that in an interview, you said that you're trying to put things into the world that alchemize the dark and turn it into something beautiful. What did you mean by that?
I meant that the hard things that have happened to me, or the ugly, dark things I've seen in life, have transformational properties. And so that's one thing I mean. But I also mean that the ugly or the brutal always slides down next to the beautiful. It's probably that way right this second, right outside the door. And I'm the kind of person who doesn't look away from that. And who thinks maybe some of our strongest opportunities for meaning and enlightenment come from being able to admit those two things are always existing. They're always part of one another. Creation, destruction, brutal, beautiful. But that's no news to you because you think about and talk about that stuff all the time. I'm just kind of shining a narrative light on it because I don't know how to do anything else.
We're sitting in Lansu Chinese Gardens here in downtown Portland, and we're in an area of Portland that used to be known for heroin addiction, homelessness.
That's why I'm smirking while I was
kids on the
talking
street,
about it.
prostitution, murders. I mean, the Pearl, legendarily, when I moved here in the 90s,
It's a
for
brutal
Portland,
place.
a brutal
It's a
place.
brutal place, and yet we're sitting in this incredibly beautiful new narrative. But it's both. It's both at once. I know I'm standing or sitting on the bones of the brutality that came before this, and I can take pleasure in admiring the beauty of this remade place.
Can we talk a little bit about your childhood before we get into the books?
Oh, what do you mean?
I just want to know where you grew up.
Oh, I was born in San Francisco, and when I was about 4, we moved to near Seattle, Washington, and I stayed there till I was about 15, and I lived in the strip of crappy sand known as Florida while I was in high school. And then I jumped all over the place. After leaving home in the high school years, I went to more than one college, lived in Texas, lived in California, lived in the Pacific Northwest, lived in New York, lived in Boston, I'm probably skipping some.
I want to, you've written in your books about your family, and I don't want to take you into too much of that, but just to, for our audience that wants to pursue those things, they can read the books. It's all in there. But you've written about abuse that you and your sister and mother suffered from your father, and how that has informed your life and who you are and who you've become and your art in so many ways. And I want to get to talking about the books and talking about how you've alchemized that darkness in your own life and in your own art. But I just first want to ask you just about surviving that as a child before you got to the place where you now are turning that around, and how that's affected your relationship with your mother and sister.
Well, they weren't really with me when I went through the most important stage, which was pure nuclear rage. My sister was away, and I had moved away from home, so I kind of went through the rage stage solo. But I have to be honest, if I hadn't gone through the rage stage, I probably wouldn't be here today at all. And I think girls especially are discouraged from passing through the rite of passage rage stage that boys are sometimes afforded. Not always, but sometimes. So I did pass through a rage stage, and it helped me forge a survivor identity. And so how it affected my relationship with my mother was I just spent the rest of her life trying everything in my power to not give her pain.
Did a part of you blame her for not protecting you, or did you see her?
Not till after she was dead.
Oh, huh.
It's only been since she's died that I can feel the rest of my way through, why didn't you get us out of there feelings, because I was so deferential to her pain while she was alive. It obliterated every other story, and so I just didn't want her to have any more pain. And then after she died, I was sort of released to feel the rest of my deal, and I didn't really feel blame exactly, but I did carry the question, why didn't you get us the hell out of there? And probably, I can hear it in my voice, apparently I still carry a little sediment of, why didn't you get us out? But I could also write a short story about a woman in her situation that would fully explain how that happens and how they stay and why they stayed and how they didn't think they could get out.
You write in the Chronology of Water, that book took me a year and a half to read. I'm a slow reader, but that's not why. I got to the chapter on rocks early in the book and closed the chapter and put it down and couldn't pick the book up for a year and a half. And I would walk across the house and it would stare at me. My ex-wife and I lost a child as well, and I think that's part of the reason why it hit me so hard, but also just the way that you break language down and do new things. That book is called an anti-memoir in some reviews, and I don't know if I was prepared, even from an artistic standpoint, to see somebody do some things that you were doing with language. So that was one of the chapters that really spoke to me. Another section was when you were talking about swimming in many places in the book, but swimming was a thing that got you out of the environment, got you out of Florida, got you out of, maybe not out of your body, but into your body in a different way.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in the book when you talk about waiting for these acceptance letters to come back, and I mean, it turns my stomach even to bring it up now, and that your father would have to open the mail first and read it first, and your mother and you would have to sit at the table and wait and look for any sign
classic.
This kind of, I mean, this real, patriarch notion.
Talk about paternal order.
Yeah, and to break away from that was huge, right? That's what swimming represented for you.
Yeah, it was a portal. It was an exit route that I could combine with my rage and what agency I did have. And it took me out of the house, took me away from home, and it gave me a way to not come back. And for that, I'm grateful to swimming for the rest of my life. It's something else to me now, but that's what it was at that time.
You went off to Texas
That was a good idea.
for competitive, or at least to be on the swim team for a scholarship, and that didn't go so well because that's when the rage started coming out, right?
Yeah.
Once you got away to
exactly.
be safe enough
Exactly.
to do that. When, just in, being friends with you and colleagues and being at your readings and then looking at, talking to people and looking at response to your work, so many people, especially women, but not just, say the same thing or versions of the same thing over and over again, which is that you gave them permission to access their own anger in their own story. And I mean, have you let that sit in? I mean, that's amazing. What do you do when you hear that from these women?
So how I live with that kind of thing is, I don't think it's me specifically. I just think I'm among those who help certain energies open up so that we all can move differently. And so instead of hearing it like, oh, you are the one who did, like I'm Keanu Reeves.
I was going to say, you took the blue and the red pill.
I do think there's a matrix, but I think we all have, different kinds of energies that we help each other open up so more people can be fully realized. So that's kind of how I hear it. I feel lucky to be among those who can fiddle around with energies so that more of us can realize ourselves.
We're going to have an artist named David Gonzalez, who's a spoken word artist and performer. He's come to the school before. I think you know his work.
Cool.
He's performed at the Kennedy Center and Lincoln Center and the Carnegie Hall. And I was talking with him the other day, recording the episode. It's going to air after yours. And he said, as a master storyteller, as a guy that's won all these awards, he said he doesn't like storytellers that believe that they are in possession of a wisdom that they're going to give to the audience.
Correct.
That when they see themselves as a conduit, maybe an active, not a passive conduit, but a conduit for these ancient archetypes and truths and experiences that exist apart from them, but also within them, and also apart from and within every single individual in the audience.
Until you got to the ancient archetypes part, I was totally with you.
And I want to get to that.
I'm still kind of with you.
I want to get to that,
But I've developed some recent crinkly thoughts around old stories and archetypes and ancient myth. But I still agree with the general sentiment. Yeah, and I'm around those other kind of artists and writers and all the time who do think that perhaps they are the one.
That puts the audience into the passive role. That puts the reader into a person who's just there to witness your brilliance.
It celebratizes the speaker in a way that is a little too Jesus phenom for me.
Well, we're going to take our first break. You're listening to On the Block Radio with Andy Gurvich. Our guest is professor, author, feminist warrior, breaker of gender identities, and art terrorist, Lidia Yuknavitch.
Cool.
We are broadcasting live, or recording live at least. Broadcasting live, recording live. Producer Mike, what the hell are we doing? From Lan Su Chinese Garden here in Portland, Oregon. At the Tao of Tea. The owner, Yvonne, was very gracious to let us come in and do the show today. And for those of you that live in Portland or in the area or are visiting, you absolutely must come check this place out. It was wonderful. Okay, we'll be back after these words, folks.
There's one thing you can never have sex without.
It's not something you buy.
Or something you take.
In fact, there's only one way to get it.
It has to be given to you, freely.
It's consent.
Because sex without it isn't sex.
It's rape. Consent.
If you don't get it, you don't get it. It's on us to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
A family on the beach, as if we were ever a family on the beach. When my sister and I were adults, we visited my parents in Florida. Guilt? Dumb hope? When we played in the ocean, we forgot ourselves. Sister, self, father, memory loss. When we finally reached my father, he was floating face down in the knee-deep ocean. When I flipped him over, I saw that his face was distorted into a grimace. We pulled his 210 pounds of dead weight onto the shore, both screaming at him to live. The murder I'd longed to commit all my life in front of me. Kill, or suck the killing back and pump it into the story of someone else. I did not kill him. I did not save him. I'm learning to live on land.
Thank you for listening to On the Block.
Welcome back, everyone, to On the Block Radio. This is your host, Andy Gurvich. We are sitting with Lidia Yuknavitch in the Tao of Tea in the Lansu Chinese Gardens in the middle of downtown Portland, Oregon. When we left, we were just starting to talk a little bit about a comment you made about alchemizing the dark, about one, giving yourself the permission to experience rage for the things that happen to you, but then moving into a place to try to do something with that rage. And art was that for you. Yeah?
It was the place where I learned you could develop agency in terms of different forms of self-expression rather than what I was used to, which is a myriad of forms of self-destruction. That I was really good at. But art showed me that there was another path, and I could make things instead of break things. And this is a place where I identify a lot with men. Who carry different forms of rage. Culture doesn't give them very many forms of, here's where you can express that and it'll be okay. I had that level of rage, a very male rage, and art gave me a place to put it, which is why I like working in rehab centers and prisons and places they send bad teens to, because I can show them a canvas or a page, and it always works. Always. There's not a single time where you can't give a person who's in that kind of crisis the means to put something out of themselves onto a page or a canvas, or play a song or whatever, or clay works great too.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that is a primary motivation for why I started this program. I mean, I did want to do something for other people and to celebrate art and creativity and passion in the world and in people that we interview, but in some ways the show is for me, and as a person who suffered physical and emotional and sexual abuse in my family growing up, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to morph that rage, right? How to use a kind of alchemic process to turn it into something authentic and beautiful in my own life. And I think the reason I want to sit down with people and talk about beauty and transformation is because a part of me knows that that's possible.
Right.
My friend Antero Ali talks, and I brought this up in other broadcasts, about when we experience these shocks, violent ones, things that take things from us, they are opportunities for creativity, that in those moments of uncertainty is when we have the highest potential, the highest opportunity to go invent ourselves, to go make meaning in the world.
It's a hard lesson.
And I believe that, right? But when I get cut off on the highway, right, I want to scream and curse at the guy that, or when, I am triggered into the feeling that I felt when I was sexually abused as a child or something, it's hard to remember, this is an opportunity for creativity and transformation. What I want to do is break things or scream or run or drink or fuck or yell or all of the above. And What I like about the characters in your books is that they're not tidy.
No.
Right? And I appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about the Chronology of Water, and we'll lead up to Smallbacks.
It's okay.
When I went on to Goodreads, I was fascinated, one, that there's like 6,000 reviews or something to this book.
Goodreads is a cesspool.
It is a cesspool. and I was talking with producer Mike over here about it, and one of the things he pointed out is that nobody who has a kind of tepid response to something leaves a review on the internet, right? And so all of the reviews are she's the devil or she's Jesus, right? One after the next. This book sucks. She's a hack. This woman is the greatest person that ever lived. And so, yes, and so it's Goodreads is sort of like the Yelp of the literary world, right?
A little bit, yeah.
But what I was fascinated by is something that I found in there that you had said about the book. And you said that partway through the writing of the Chronology of Water, you showed it to your sister, and she said, you have to finish this because you have to go back and get our body. What did she mean by that?
Well, first of all, that's the kind of sentence that will forever obliterate Goodreads for me.
Yeah.
It makes Goodreads meaningless. But what she meant literally was that, as you know, if you come from a background of abuse or trauma or war or any of those kinds of things, you usually experience some form of disassociation or some not realistic thing you do in your head to your body, or psychosomatic problems or issues. And telling our story was a way to go and retrieve the bodies we'd hidden or made ill or left behind or anesthetize in ourselves so we wouldn't have to feel, and bring them back with us as adult women to kind of, well, now this starts sounding woo-woo-y and like juju-y, and
if anyone's going to sound juju-y on this program, it's me. So
maybe you shouldn't say juju. But it's sort of like rebirthing a body. And that's why I said it sounds woo-woo-y. But in some very real ways, she and I are finding our bodies at middle age. And it's really weird, I got to be honest with you.
I'm reminded of Eve Ensler's TED Talk, Suddenly My Body. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's right after she came out of her cancer treatments, and her hair's all gone, and she's thin and like dangerously so, and talks about how she suffered sexual abuse as a child from her father. This is an all too common motif, and left her body disassociated from it, and then went into all of the things, into the drugs, into the sex, and then into activism, right, as a way to keep running from that. And her body was trying to talk to her, and she was getting sicker and sicker and was ignoring it. I identify with that
a lot. I think she's saying out loud what whole armies of us do to ourselves and don't like to admit. I very much identify with what she said. I watched that too.
Wow.
That was really important.
In the second part, our final segment, I want to get into this. I want to mix it up with you on archetypes and Campbell and all that stuff, because I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But when I've spoken with Bob Walter from the Joseph Campbell Foundation, he was close friends with Campbell, and I give him this whole rap. I spew off to him, Campbell let me access the concept of faith again, and through reading Campbell, I was able to find, access mystery again in the world, and to stand in some kind of mystical awareness of the cosmos. And Bob said, so many people come up to me, and not to diminish my experience, but that I hear this all the time, that's what Campbell served for people. And I was thinking about it when I was thinking about talking to people about your work, because so many people say this kind of thing, right? And that it changed my life, it's the greatest thing I've ever read. As your star sort of rises, because I know you and I know you're an introverted person, how are you handling fame? How are you handling accolades and scorn? Because it seems like I don't know what I would do, right? If this radio program takes off and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people listening to it,
I'm sure
I would be terrified by the compliments and even more terrified by some of the the negative stuff. But how do you navigate that?
Well,
the good and the bad from
I was
readers.
talking to somebody else recently. So the first round of it for me was when Chronology of Water came out. And I'm not a famous person, and I wasn't then, and I'm not now. But what did come at me was a wave of personal stories from other people because I had opened the door to mine. Everybody
was going to tell you theirs, yeah.
And which is fine.
You got to be crazy to share stuff with people about yourself.
Now I know. No, I'm kidding. I wasn't ready for that, and it nearly killed me. So that was a really hard 4 years.
Because you feel like you want to hold space for each and every one of them, but that's got to be depleting.
Literally.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any strategies for how to do it without giving all of myself away. And so it literally nearly killed me for about a 4-year period of time. But more recently, because I've learned some strategies from those 4 years, I don't think of the attention you get as making you rise. I think of the attention you get as an opportunity to make some more thresholds where readers and writers can meet each other and help get more people through the door or more people closer to their reality or story. So I guess since I'm fundamentally wired to reject hierarchies, I think of the attention, any attention now that comes my way, as not something that makes me rise, but something that I can laterally open more possibilities for other people.
I've heard you say before that if there's a ladder that's going somewhere and you've climbed to some level in it, that what you've done it for is to kick the door open and wave a bunch of people up behind you. And I hear that's what you're saying.
Also, I'm anti-ladder in general. I'd probably be dismantling the ladder
Dismantling the ladder to begin with?
Yeah.
Yeah, no more pyramid schemes?
No. I mean, I think of making art and being and teaching as a lateral enterprise, not an enterprise that's vertical where you try to rise.
The scope of awareness of you and your work is growing.
I have more readers.
Yeah, you have more readers now than before.
To that.
Has that changed how you approach writing?
No, not at all.
You don't feel like you have to manage reader expectations?
No. There's so I just lied there just a teeny bit. I don't feel I have to do what you just said.
Okay.
I do have an awareness that relationships with readers form when I put something in the world. Does it change what I write? Only in one way. I'm becoming more and more interested in making books that have social consciousness in them, at least a question raised. Maybe not an answer, but that's changed a tiny bit. When I first started writing in my 20s and 30s, all I wanted was to, agitate the reader and piss them off and scratch them a little bit with my art in a kind of badass way, and that's really changed. I want the art I make now or the books I write now to be micro thresholds for possible change, even if that's only one person. I'm okay with that.
Banksy was asked once, a painting of his sold for $1 million, and someone put a comment on his website and said, hey, how do you feel now that one of your works sold for that much? And he responded with a quote from Rembrandt. When Rembrandt was asked a similar question, one of his paintings finally sold at auction for a lot of money and was called a masterpiece, and they asked him what he felt about that, and Rembrandt said, I shall now be conscripted to painting masterpieces for the rest of my life.
Right, I worry about that. We live in a commodity culture, and the day I'm writing to sell a book is the day I should walk away from it.
So you don't, as you become a brand, you don't feel a pressure to write a Lidia Yuknavitch book, as opposed.
I feel the pressure coming toward me. I have no interest in it. I mean, okay. Georgia O'Keeffe has a quote that I'll bungle because I can't remember quotes. I don't have a brain like that, but it had something to do with the fact that neither criticism nor praise got to her very much because she already figured herself out and she was good.
Oh.
She already knew what she was doing.
Yeah,
so
right.
And I think I fall more in that category. The older I get, I'm hitting some crone years. And the older I get, it's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. Therefore, the criticism and the praise have less, impact on me. I'm just going to keep making my art. And if that turns into books that don't sell, I'm ready for that too. I remember how to sell them on the street corner as Kinko's pamphlets, so I could go back to that.
I want to go back to a little bit of that just for a second before we go on to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about Dora and then about the small backs before we close up. And that's when we'll get into our mythology archetype showdown. Which I'll lose, but we'll do it.
No, you won't.
Maybe they won't be a loser in that.
I'm not going to take it away from you, don't worry.
Thanks. So, just to go back to your bio a little bit, you went to Texas to get away from the family. Again, that's a tough place to go to get away from anything. But
I showed them.
You got a scholarship there. The Rage started coming out. This is all in the Chronology of Water for folks to read. And so you lost the scholarship and then kind of went into a dark period with all of the, the isms, the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll. And then a change happened when did you start writing? When did you start thinking art making was the thing? When was the first time you realized that you could create and not just
destroy? Those are two different questions. So I first started exuding art in a state of crisis and psychosis and grief after my daughter died. I was making pages of stuff that were art expressions. My first realization that was a thing happened later in my mid-20s, husband number 2, if you're keeping track, where I became conscious that, I could make these into stories. Here is something to do. And it was when I was moving from undergraduate to graduate school, intellectually too. So my realization happened at a different time than just the exuding of artistic expression. That happened out of grief and trauma. But it was a mess. It was... Yeah. I think I've told you before, it was notebooks of Ted Kaczynski-sized writing that looked hieroglyphic.
And you didn't think you were going to show this to anybody, right?
No. Okay. But embedded within there were the beginnings of the first stories I ever wrote.
And were you making other art at that time as well?
Drawings. Scary.
When did it become clear to you that this was something you could do?
Yeah, like I said, around age 26 or so.
And this was in graduate school?
I was moving right between undergrad and grad school.
And you went to the U of O?
Yeah, go Ducks.
And this is when you studied with Ken Kesey?
Yeah, I was still an undergraduate, but he ran a graduate class at U of O.
That you snuck into, right?
I didn't sneak in. My friend dragged me in. Meredith Wadley Suter dragged me in, and he let me stay. Shockingly. He liked that there was an interloper. Yeah. Of course. He thought that was hilarious. Yeah. And I wasn't paying. They were taking the class for money from U of O, so he liked that idea.
And then before we go to our next break, I just want to ask you, you stayed around in Eugene, right, after grad school?
12 years.
And you started a literary magazine and...
Two Girls Review.
Yeah, tell us about that, because that was a big part of your life, right? You made a lot of art and published a lot of stuff.
It was kind of an early zine before zines were zines. Yeah. Or when they were first starting. And we were grad students in an English department who wanted to resist the dominant paradigm and hurt the man. So you did. We made up a magazine, and I went, you'll like this, I went to the faculty boxes and put a little note in each of them. When you open it, it said, "This is not a bomb. We just want your money to make art." And it had an envelope in it for $10. And 100 people gave me $10.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Do you miss? I heard you say a second ago you remember standing on the street corner and selling books. Do you? Is there a part of you sometimes that misses the kind of simplicity and the immediacy of that? Because now you write a book and then it's off to the editors, off to this, and then the galleys, and then you're just waiting around for a year and a half for the thing to come out.
Yeah,
it's a big ordeal. That piece of
me is alive and well, and what I do with that part of myself is I help other people do that. Yeah. Because there are people we both know who are just starting out, and you can help them agitate their way to whatever they want, and so that's where I put that energy now.
Melanie Aldrich.
Yeah, Melanie Aldrich is a really good example.
That's a name that our listeners who are gonna know in the years coming.
Whether you want to or not, she's coming.
She's taking names. All right, we're gonna take our second break. This is On the Block Radio with Professor Andy Gurvich and Professor Lidia Yuknavitch. I never introduce myself as professor, but it's an inside joke why I did just there.
Yeah,
that has to do with our workplace. Write me off air and I'll tell you folks what it is if anyone's interested. All right, you're listening to On the Block Radio. We are at Lansu Chinese Gardens in the Tao of Tea interviewing Lidia Yuknavitch, and we will be back in a moment.
the bay on a clear day, and I can watch the boats come in and set their anchors. And my folks away at the store, so I don't have to listen to anyone say anything. And I swim out as far as I can and float on my back, just waiting for nothing. I hope they never come back to this house. It's a lot more fun alone. I can do anything I want, and so I'm swimming, more like floating, and I'll just stay out here until the night comes crashing down. And I swim out as far as I can and float on my back, just waiting for nothing. They always come home at the wrong time, like when I'm alright and don't need no one at all. They always come home.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. This is Andy Gurvich. You're listening to On the Block Radio. I'm sitting with Lidia Yuknavitch. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something we were talking about during the break, actually. Somebody made a comment, it was either you or Professor or Producer Mike, that I have a reputation for talking a lot, right?
Yes.
Now you're being quiet. When we started the show, it was important for me to make this podcast not about me, but about the guests, and have it be guest-driven, not host-driven. And I was saying that I really resonate with what you've done in The Small Backs of Children, how you identify characters by their roles. And so there's the photographer, the child, the artist. And in many ways, I want to be the host of the show, because I want the show to be kind of a conduit for these transformations for other people. And there's... when you go to the website, you'll see there's a couple of different, slogan-y kind of things on the website, and one of them is listen, engage, transform. And when I post things for the site, I always hashtag that everywhere, right? And I was showing some folks our Twitter page the other day, and I looked at the listen, engage, transform hashtag, and most of the things posted were for our show, but there was a couple that weren't, and one of them was from a Black Lives Matter activist in Baltimore who had put something up about an event a protest that they were going to about police brutality, and in his hashtags at the end, there was a bunch of them, and one of them was this listen, engage, transform, with the capitals exactly the way that I had done it. And I was fascinated to see that, because where I got that idea from and how I've structured the show is right from my evolution of being an advocate. right? When I'm interested in being an advocate for people in the gender spectrum, I'm interested in being an advocate for people of color. Where there's oppression, where there are people that don't have the same access and opportunity that I do, I want to do what I can in my life to be available to help be a conduit to that access and even things up. But there's this thing in the advocacy community, especially among white people and especially among men, not only that, right, where we can kind of take over, where we'll come onto a Facebook thread and suddenly we're telling everybody about the black experience. Suddenly we're telling everybody about gender. I made the joke with you about how when I made the connection between, ancient goddess spirituality and third wave feminism, I thought for a second that I was the first one to discover this, and I was going around telling everybody kind of what time it was, and folks like you were very patient to let me have my little moment of discovery. But one of the things I've learned as an advocate, or am learning as an advocate, is this very model. What's the first thing you want to do when you want to advocate for somebody from an oppressed community? And that is listen. Yeah. We let folks speak for themselves and on their own terms. And when we're done listening, we need to listen 3 times longer than we thought we needed to. At least. In the beginning, yeah. And then maybe even some more. The second thing we need to do is engage. And by engage, it's ask questions, right? Is this what I hear you saying? Is this what I hear you talking about, right? To try to show that we understand what it is that they're saying, right? We can never fully, right? Yeah. But we also can as fellow humans. So when we listen, we can engage thoughtfully and respectfully as a way to enhance our listening, right? As a way to enhance our understanding. And then the thought is that at the end of those two things, we experience a kind of transformation in our relationships to one another. And so all of that to say, I was pleased to see somebody grab that hashtag and use it for something unrelated to the show, because I took the idea from my understanding of how the activist community, people who are in these communities that I hope to help advocate for, are teaching me to be a better advocate and not appropriate their experience, but actually allow and work with them as they speak and advocate on their own terms for their own identities. And I heard you say before that before the break, you want to include these kinds of things in your art, that you want your books to have your own version of that kind of stuff. Is that kind of correct?
Sort of. I'm interested in raising social consciousness questions in my art making. But I do think in terms of advocacy in America, and particularly white people advocacy in America, there's a stage we need to go through, which is shutting up and getting out of the way before we even earn the right to be good advocates. The time is right now, where other people's voices and lives and bodies deserve all the attention, all the stage, all the discussion, and we keep moving into quote unquote help. Yeah. And it's our own forms of help that you were kind of just talking about, that this are in dire need of adjustment. I thought it was really funny that recent conversation between Roxane Gay and Erica Jong about feminism, and they didn't quite agree.
Tell our audience a little bit about what that was for those that didn't.
Well, they were talking about women empowerment and feminism, and all I'll say about it, you can find it online, is that they didn't quite agree. Erica wanted to keep insisting that there's been a tradition in feminism of people of color since the inception of feminism, and she starts naming all these people that have been in the tradition, and Roxane was re-articulating for people who don't understand it that there's something specific happening right now around people of color's bodies and voices and their own storytelling moment that isn't divorced from the past or traditions, but really is something different. And it's like Erica wasn't really listening or couldn't hear. She kept wanting to reinsert the sort of benevolent white spokesperson. And Erica's a woman doing that. But, you know, the great white hope is in need of some quiet time.
Go to your corner.
From my point of view.
Yeah, maybe a time
which is not to say, I mean, I am agreeing with you that in your art project you're making these podcasts, that you're opening conversations up that usually are in corners. And and that's a meaningful thing to put into culture. But because you mentioned the Black Lives Matter example, I'm giving you an opinion. You didn't actually ask for.
No, I love the idea of what you just said about getting out of the way, and I think in many ways this is exactly a version of what I'm talking about. I think you articulated it a little more simply and a little better. Yeah, you're letting the other
voices rise. Yeah.
I didn't want to make the show about politics or about activism or about causes or about that for that very reason. And in the opening comments to the first show, I talked about this very thing, that the show was not going to be pushing a particular ideological viewpoint. And I made a joke about, why another program from a white male. Yeah, right. And obviously our perspective has not gotten out there enough, right? And the guest, Adam Klugman, was chuckling because he and I both realize it's exactly the opposite. And so why another man yammering on about something, right? It's time to shut up and move aside. And as odd as it is, this podcast is my attempt to try to contribute to that a little bit by being a conduit for those voices.
Yeah, I understand.
Who knows if I'm going to be successful at it or do it correctly? But that's the process we're trying to engage in.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about Dora a little bit?
Sure.
Dora, A Head Case. This book is, for those that don't know the backstory, maybe I'll give the backstory of Freud and Ida, and then you can maybe talk about the book a little bit and have a few questions about it. So many folks consider Sigmund Freud the sort of father of anything that starts with father of. Almost what comes next is going to be a bummer, right? But the father of psychoanalysis. And he wrote a book early on called The Interpretation of Dreams. And he published it, and nobody liked it. Everyone thought he was a nut, right? And they did not appreciate or understand or relate to his theories at all. And he was furious about this and thought, I'm onto something here. People need to take this seriously. If I provide them with a case study, if I show them this work in action, then they'll see how efficacious my research is, how that I'm really actually onto something with this dream theory. And so a young girl is brought to him as a patient, who they call Ida, correct? And
he gave her the name Dora.
He gave her the name
Dora. Her real name was Ida Bauer.
Ida Bauer. And as the story goes, she was a teenager, 14, 15?
15.
15 at the time. Her father had engaged in a extramarital affair with a friend of theirs' wife. Mm-hmm. And he made an exchange, basically. He made an agreement with the husband of the other woman that if that gentleman was allowed to sleep with the daughter, this 15-year-old girl, then her father, Ida's father, would be able to sleep with this man's wife. It would be kind of a trading the daughter for the other wife. And this was all done with the awareness of everybody involved, including the mother. Correct? Ida's mother?
I think not so much the mother.
Not so much the mother, okay. Strangely, the girl wasn't down with this trade. I'm not sure there's a lot there for her, but she had other ideas for her life and her body, so she was resisting this, right? And they thought this made her hysterical.
Right. Well, she had episodes of psychosomatic difficulties, mm-hmm. chief among them losing her voice, mm-hmm. episodes where she literally would lose her voice. There's a word for that I'm spacing on right now. It's a really cool word, so I wish I could remember it. Also fainting spells. Mm-hmm. And then other kind of physical manifestations of trauma and stress that we now know a lot about.
Which would be perfectly normal when placing a 15-year-old or anybody into this kind of situation.
Yeah.
In Vienna, in the turn of the last century, they thought that something was wrong with this girl. She should be listening to her father and doing what she was told.
Yeah.
So they brought her to Freud, who was going to help her over these spells and get her back into being what a good daughter is, which is doing what her father says. She didn't like him and only stayed for a couple of months and then left the treatment. Freud was so frustrated by this that he just continued the case study without the girl there. So blanked her again, disappeared her again, and said, well,
3 different times.
Yeah, let's chase the actual patient off, but I'm just going to continue. If she would have stayed and listened to me, this would have...
I can still tell this story.
Yeah, I can still go on with prescribing what her life needs. And so she's blanked over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And again, the losing of the voice is kind of terribly symbolic in this case.
I thought so.
And this is the guy that gives us, this is the father of modern psychology.
Right, to whom we eventually give most, if not all, the authority, for at least a while.
Yeah. and who, you know, would have arguments with people like Adler and other colleagues about what do women want,
Yep.
and the weaker sex and all of this stuff. And so, you know, I guess maybe before we talk about Dora itself, how does that sit with you as an educator and as a woman? And I mean,
well, I remember I first read the actual case study. Dora is a case study of hysteria. I read it when I was about 25, 26, that same period of time we talked about earlier, when I was going through rage and an awareness, consciousness raising. And I was so angry reading that story, the actual case study, that I threw it against the wall and ripped it up and chewed on it and spit on it and peed on it.
First time I read it,
so
I thought it was
angry.
fiction. I couldn't believe that it was actually...
Well, most of the case studies read a little bit like
Yeah.
he's inventing some kind of salacious novel. He probably would have done well in this time period. He'd be way rich.
He said things in it like the girl was experiencing transference and starting to develop sexual feelings for him.
Yep.
I mean, he was wild, man.
Yeah, and he was also doing cocaine at the time.
Wow.
It's always fascinating.
What did you want to say to young people when you wrote this book? So the book is...
So the book
yeah.
takes that relationship between Freud and Dora and completely takes apart, rewrites it, casts it in modern-day Seattle with a contemporary young girl who sees a doctor for similar family scenario reasons. Only this girl is sort of a kind of goth-ish, Doc Martin wearing angry chick.
So you.
Yeah, she's a rage machine in her teen years, and therefore she gets her own voice and her own agency, and I play a story out that's at its heart, it's a farce. I mean, I literally used pre-Shakespearean structure of farce, which not a lot of people notice, because
Wow.
not a lot of people know how to track the structure.
Yeah.
But it's a farce. It's a modern farce. And I just gave her a lip, basically. And I gave her her voice back and her story, and she, let's just say she turns the tables on Freud and the dreaded Oedipal complex.
What did you want to say to young people with this book?
I didn't get to that part of the answer. That that age person, teenagers or someone moving through puberty towards adulthood, that's where your fire gets born. That's where, and so all those raging hormones that society is trying to put in check and control, and I think that's probably our most brilliant and beautiful moment of development. And what I want to say to them is, you know, the problem isn't that you're loud, the problem is you're not yelling loudly enough. And the message in the storyline is self-expression is an option for you. Because in that book, too, art rises as something people can do to help themselves manifest this rage and feelings about what society is doing to them. And Dora becomes a filmmaker. So that's the form it takes in that book. But it's really the same story in every book.
There's a character in the book named Marlene that reminded me, not in a derivative way, but just in a heart song way, of the character Rose in Tom Spanbauer's In the City
I've
of
heard that a
Shannonhunter.
lot, yeah.
Have you?
Yeah. I can see why.
Was that intentional or totally unrelated?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, now when people say it to me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally true.
I think more than just any sort of external physical characteristics. I just think that the love as a reader, it's one of those characters you don't want to not still see when the book's over. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, and I kind of like that it reminds people of Tom's character because I adore Tom and his writing. But in Lydia Land, in my world, there is a Marlene, and it's based on an actual person. And so my allegiance to writing that character was all about this person I knew.
Is that person still with us? And have they read the book?
Yep.
What do they think?
They think it's hilarious.
Has that happened to you when you write about yourself, and then when you're writing about ex-husbands and ex-lovers and stuff, these people end up in the stories? I saw a quote once that said, if you don't like what I wrote about you in my book, you should have been nicer to me.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Not everybody does this, but as a writer, I'm the person who sends any material that's based on you or about you, nonfiction or fiction, to you.
Oh, okay.
And I have honored most all requests except one.
Most all?
Most all except one.
Were you happy with Dora? Did you just say what you wanted to say in that book?
I really had to write that book after Chronology of Water. I wanted to write a funny, for me, just to me, funny book. And I wanted to write a farce, and I wanted to play in that earlier sense of the word, the necessity and the vitality of bringing play back into your life. So it was a really important book for me. It didn't do as well as other things I've written, but I don't care. It's a really important book for me.
Before we go to our next break, you mentioned that Dora is a filmmaker, and I just want to ask you a little bit about the role of film in your life, not only as a filmmaker, but just as a consumer of film. You teach film studies. You're kind of a film addict.
Junkie.
Yeah, you're a film junkie. And if you don't mind me starting to bring up your family, you were married to a filmmaker.
I'm married to a filmmaker right now, Andy Mingo. Before I was with Andy, we've been together, we think, 17 years or something like that. It's hard to count up. But before that, my obsession with film was pretty much just an aesthetic, addiction. I love everything about film. I hate it too, but I love it.
Yeah.
But having a partner that's what he does, that's changed my writing. People are always asking me, well, who are the writers who influence?
Yeah.
It's not writers.
How has it changed your writing?
Because I finally have somebody I can talk to at length over alcohol about things like the importance of image systems and image syntax. But I'm a writer.
Yeah.
And it took a filmmaker for me to be able to have the kind of conversation I want to have as a writer about the way I write.
So you now think imagistically through a text.
Really, this book in particular is a sequence of images.
It's a form of synesthesia there, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Yes, bingo.
Yeah,
that's my favorite word and concept.
Really?
In the whole world. I just had a little mini orgasm when you said that. Synesthesia is
It's a fascinating thing to study, and it's a fascinating vehicle for creative people to recast their particular art form through another medium like that and think about their writing.
Synesthesia and palimpsest are my two favorite things.
Two favorite words, too.
Yep.
Your husband, just before we go to our next break here, he's doing some great things. He's working on a project with Chuck Palahniuk at the moment, but what I'm more interested in asking about, not to take away from that project, is the wonderful work he's doing at Clackamas Community College with the film program there.
Completely invented a film program over there where students not only get hands-on experience in all aspects of filmmaking, not just film studies or theory, but filmmaking, but they get jobs before they even graduate, which, because we work at community colleges, that's a big deal.
What's that crazy get-up that Miles is always in that they can capture the motion?
That's a motion capture suit.
That's a very rare thing for anybody to have, and they have a full system at Clackamas Community College, and students get to work on that.
Yeah, he wrote the grant that achieved the purchase of that stuff, and he trains students who would have to go to California or New York ordinarily to learn that stuff. And he has corporate entities contacting Clackamas now, like, can we use your stuff?
Yeah, it's amazing. And in our next segment, I want to talk to you about the small backs of children and also a little bit about working in a community college. But just to say a few things about that, I mean, it's such a great thing to see a person like him and like you that work in a place that others consider just a place you pass through, or trade school, or a place where you bring the bare minimum, and where folks are bringing their entire passion and creativity to create these opportunities for students that are world class. I mean, every time I turn around, there's another picture of him in that program getting recognition by the state, by the former governor, by the film commission here, and for doing groundbreaking work that even four-year institutions in the state aren't doing.
Right, and those are the emerging artists of this century. And people, I could get really angry talking about what people think community colleges do compared to what we really do, but that's a good example of, that's where the next energy is going to be in our whole nation, not just, getting some students some grades.
You hit at it in Dora, and that's, and I'll say this and then go to break, the advent of digital media has created we could do a whole series of shows on this, and there's a lot of abuse and terrible things that have come along with it, but then there's also a kind of radical democratization of the creative process where people now can make films.
I like that part.
Yeah, and I can make a thing like this podcast without having, major corporate sponsorship or without having an Avid system and these kinds of things. It's really remarkable. All right, well, you are listening to On the Block Radio with Andy Gurvich. Our guest is Lidia Yuknavitch. We are at the Lansu Chinese Gardens in downtown Portland, Oregon, at the Tao of Tea.
You've been listening to On the Block with Andrew Gurvich.
So, I'm sure the irony of me mansplaining for an hour and a half about how we need to step aside and allow disenfranchised voices to emerge has not been lost on some of you. Lidia Yuknavitch brings up a very interesting point in our dialogue about how the best way to advocate for marginalized communities is to be silent, turn our attention to them, and allow their voices to take center stage. So I thought we would do that here for a moment. A name came up in our dialogue, and the name was Melanie Aldrit. I found that fascinating. We both said her name at the same time at one point in the conversation. Melanie is a former student of ours at Mount Hood Community College. She is a unique personality, a damn fine writer, and is one of the voices that Lidia was talking about. So I thought we would take some time here towards the end of the program to do what we probably should have done at the beginning of the program, and that's allow one of these voices to take center stage. If you like what you hear from Melanie, you can find her work at Gravity of the Thing, Perceptions Magazine, and forthcoming in Gobshite and Nailed Magazine.
I don't want to be beautiful. I'm scary at work when I tell a coworker, my name is Melanie, not Mel. Call me Melanie. I'm scary because I forgot to look at the floor when I said this and instead looked her in the eye. I also forgot to say please and thank you. I didn't remember to ask in a voice just above a whisper and in a higher octave. But most importantly, I assumed I could tell a person to call me by my name instead of asking. And I wasn't just wrong, I was terrifying. I'm suspicious when I go shopping. So suspicious that I need to be followed throughout the store by a person who thinks he's invisible. He's as obvious to me as the tampons on top of my produce. I can feel my face getting hot. I think about how I cry when I'm furious or scared. In my head, I picture my anger to be a piece of paper that I fold in half over and over again until it is so tiny that I can barely see it. It only takes a moment. I am an expert at this. I'm not looking at the paper in my head when my phone rings in my purse. I'm not thinking about the person following me when I dig through my purse to answer it. But I am thinking about that phone call when I'm at the exit and plainclothes security are going through my purse and checking every item on my receipt. I'm a gang member when I go running at night. I'm in a gang because at first I jog slowly, but that isn't enough for my brain to shut off. So then I jog faster, and then I run, and then I see a hill and I sprint up it and my legs are burning, but I'm so happy. I focus on the music blaring in my ears and keep running, but then I see flashing lights come in front of me and then jump the curb. I stop. I give the cop my ID. I'm prepared for this. I always carry ID when I run. But then I'm in handcuffs and I'm sitting in the back seat of a cop car that smells like disinfectant and piss, and I hear my name and possible gang member. I wonder why, and I look down at my red shirt, red pants, red shoes. I'm not at all prepared for this. When nothing comes up and I am let go, and I'm told, you're lucky. I think it's because I'm running in red, so I run in black. I don't want to be seen. I just want to run. It isn't enough to run in black because the same cop stops me a week later, and I ask if I'm going to be arrested. I am in handcuffs again, but this time sitting on the sidewalk. I must be running from a house I broke into. This is what I'm told. So I run on the trail at night instead of the sidewalk because I want my legs to hurt, not my head and my heart. When I talk about these things, I'm aggressive. I'm angry. This is what I'm told, so I try to be quieter. In my head, I make emotion into kindling and burn it away, over and over again. When I speak quietly about these things with burnt-to-dust feelings, I'm making myself a target. I'm missing the big picture. I haven't been shot, so I'm making a big deal out of nothing. I think about what I'm saying and how I can say it differently. I try it with smaller words in a different order. But now, I don't know that all lives matter. I'm holding back progress by focusing too much on what's wrong. I'm pulling the race card, playing the victim, not trying hard enough not to be a stereotype. I'm saying too much. I am depressing people. I hate white people. Racism doesn't exist, but stupid black people do. These are the things I hear. What I don't say is that I'm afraid. But it's difficult to say the exact thing I'm scared of. I know that I'm afraid when I see a cop car, and I'm afraid when I hear the word nigger. I'm afraid I'm scary. Because I don't want to be scary, but I'm not sure how not to be at all times. I don't want to be aggressive. I know it's because my feelings come out in my voice, and my feelings make my voice intimidating. I don't want to be scary, so then I'm afraid to speak. I'm quiet for so long, I wonder if I'm crazy. I ask myself if my perception is wrong. I become curious about whether there is a way to act, a voice to use, a way to shop that will make me invisible. I fantasize about becoming invisible at will. In a corner of my mind, the idea that if I did the right things, I wouldn't be a target at all gains mass. When I'm thinking, I'm silent. When I'm silent, I'm smiling. I'm careful to look friendly when I'm thinking. When I'm standing still and silent and wondering, I hear, "You are so beautiful. I wish I had your skin." I hear this again and again, and it starts to become truth. But I don't want to be beautiful. I want to speak.
Welcome back to the final segment of the program, folks. This is Andy Gurvich. You're listening to On the Block Radio. Our guest is Lidia Yuknavitch. I just want to talk with you a little bit about the new book, The Small Backs of Children. You said in the book that, in some interviews, that you want to move away from realism with this book. And talk a little bit about what you mean by that and why.
That is the one thing I feel as if I succeeded at entirely.
Yeah.
Realism has a set of limits that made it impossible for me to tell the kind of story I wanted to tell. And some people think I just did not, maybe I don't know enough about realism, or maybe I am just lazy or something like that. But trust me when I say I know a great deal about the choices, the formal choices of realism, and they don't interest me, to be honest with you, any longer. I don't think we live in a time where the realism in the novel is very interesting. It sells a lot of books, and it makes a lot of money.
And for our listeners who might not be familiar with the concept, just briefly, what do you mean by realism?
In a general sense, a set of characters, usually a main character, who experiences a psychological similarity to things we kind of know about ourselves and traverses a character arc so that they change by the end of the story. And so the lives of characters in novels kind of smell like our lives, enough so that we can identify with them. The problem, from my point of view, is partly that I don't know any humans who are like characters in books at all, except the fucked up characters in novels that everybody likes to shun. You know, I know a lot of people who have more character traits like the dude in Lolita than I do best-selling novels where the characters are kind of nicey.
Yeah.
And in particular, because this book has no main character, and the character constructions you could point to as maybe main characters are all women, I was instantly disinterested in the idea that I was going to make a sentimentalized or romanticized set of women characters. All the women I know are really contradictory. They've got competing drives that come out in weird ways. Sometimes they're driven by their id entirely. So I wanted to make characters who are like the women I know.
So what I hear you saying is, ironically, realism isn't very real.
Yeah. It's the least real narrative form from my point of view, in the way that Francis Bacon painting looks more precise to me and accurate, a portrait of a face, than a photorealistic painting, even though I like photorealistic paintings.
Your characters in this book, in The Small Backs of Children, are identified by the roles, and so it's the artist, the filmmaker, the girl, the photographer. And I've heard you say that that you, again, in moving away from this realism and highlighting the artist's labor more than other aspects about them, that you were trying to dial back this cult of character.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, and so that was a project for you in this book, and I'm wondering, how do you create pathways for identification and empathy with the characters in that context?
I replaced what you usually identify with in characters with a series of emotional and physical intensities. So you would maybe, hopefully, feel something very intense in your body while you're reading, or you would hit an intense emotional moment and register that more like you would in your subconscious or in a dream. And so you can still empathize, identify, it's just another access route, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about the book in two different ways. One way you said I think in the Rumpus interview, that was a great interview, and the person brought up what they called the singularity of the story.
That was such a cool idea.
Yeah, you were like, oh, that's cool. And it made you say two things that were somewhat contradictory, but I thought that was fascinating, that you were obsessed with the idea of all the characters being a single psyche.
Yeah.
That all of these were kind of shades of subjectivities and emotional
one way
flashes.
to read it.
But then another way, you said that you didn't want there to be a main character. You wanted to do away with this idea and push that characterization move, and you wanted to make it plurality at its heart. So there's a question in there. I mean, you're kind of playing with this singularity and plurality in this book, and how those two interplay with one another.
That's the way to put it. I'm interested in the relationship between those two supposed poles or ends, and the interaction between them. Because I think we're breaking down and reconstituting all day long, every day, and every night. And I like that idea.
Is this your problem with the ancient archetypes that we talked about earlier? Okay, what is? Because
this is where we have to arm.
Yeah, here we go.
I don't want to take your belief or
please take it
away from you.
It's happened to me 4 or 5 times in my life.
That's not my wrinkle. My only wrinkle, and you can probably even appreciate this, my only wrinkle is that I'm at a place in my own evolution as an artist and thinker where what annoys me is that we treat archetype and mythology like it can't change. And it's locked in its historical moment, and we got it right.
Right.
And that seems to me to be untenable. I can't. So that bothers me, and I'd like to start asking questions about that. And the other thing that's hard for me is, why can't it be true we're making new ones right now?
Yeah.
Which isn't something you would disagree with necessarily. So that's what I mean. I'm not going to really arm wrestle you. I don't think these are things you disagree with. I'm just at this certain place in my thinking where what bugs me is that we lock them, solidify them, let them be static.
Well, I read an essay of yours that you put in Guernica called Woven. And in it you mentioned these Lithuanian mythological creatures.
That's where I started thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated with what those mean to you, because here these things are that they have, as you mentioned in the essay, these kind of Neolithic roots, but
why do they have to?
But you are taking them and folding them into an entirely different subjectivity.
I haven't found a satisfactory answer either in talking to people who are very intelligent or books I've read that are intelligent. Why can't we dislocate them and relocate them and let them come alive differently than the way we originally inherited? Like, why? Why not?
I think we can. I think we must.
I don't think it's something you disagree with.
Yeah.
But how it comes through to us often gets spoken about as if, well, you know, the Oedipal myth, we got that one down. We know all about it, and that's that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
For so many reasons.
The American transcendentalists talked about this. They said, why is religion for me reading about a direct experience that somebody else had with transcendence 3,000 years ago?
Very similar.
Yeah.
But, you know, even the word archetype means there they
finished
are.
product. Yeah. And I have artist friends who think that these are fully formed, finished things that appear to us as they are and as they have always been.
I do too. I'm just starting to. So all I'm really saying is I'm starting to wonder about that.
Yeah. No.
And this book and that essay opened something up for me. That's put me in a questioning mode.
Well, I think the emphasis, if I can speak to it from what I see your writing, is more on process. And there are people that look at this. There are in my former self as a Christian pastor, there were process theologians that looked at God as process, not as fully formed entity, right? And that process allows us to experience subjectivities in time.
Right. Yeah, I'm much more, I find that an easier place to have these ideas and talk about them.
I think so too. It reminds me of this notion of woven, reminds me of the French concept of bricolage.
Yeah.
Right, of taking these bricks of the wreckage of our former selves and building new selves that contain elements of the former but are in and of themselves rearranged, right? And they come from great brokenness.
Which isn't some hairy weird idea. That's
I just as we're coming to the end here in the Guernica essay that I highly recommend our listeners go check out, you talk about a very troubling experience that happened with you and a young woman when you were in New York that led to you both being attacked, and then left her partially paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And you talk about how you don't bring that up much, and then all of a sudden in a writing class last year, you just started telling the room about it.
Yeah.
And then you said a couple times, I don't know if I was a good teacher then. I don't know if that was too much self-disclosure. And I resonate with that. Well, I trust you in thinking that, and and for you making that determination. But I'm interested in maybe you speaking a little bit to that. And if I can preface the question with a very brief story. I teach world literature as well, and my students last year were reading the Epic of Sanjara, the Mali epic, and in it, it's about a young prince who is chased off from his family by a kind of a wicked brother-in-law who wants to sort of take over the throne that's rightfully his, and so he has to live in exile. His mother dies, and he's not even able really to safely come back to bury her.
Right.
And through a series of things, through his interactions with other people, through him learning about his own story, and through magic, and through community, and through story, he's able to sort of come into his identity and go back and assume his place in among his people. And when we were reading this, I found out on Facebook that my mother had died. Somebody put a Facebook post up that she had died. I hadn't heard, and I weren't on speaking terms, and so I didn't even know she was sick. And the reason we weren't on speaking terms is I'd been chased out of my family by an abusive stepbrother who was the one who had physically and sexually abused me and had kind of built a wall around my mother, not his. He's my dad's son from a different marriage, and I had no access to her. I wasn't even at her funeral. Wasn't even mentioned in her obituary. And I realized when we were reading Sanjara that I was Sanjara, not an African prince, as much as I'd love to be one, but that I was a person who had been exiled from his family and who had to reclaim that identity through magic, through story, and through community. And to me, that's the power of mythology is its adaptability. Not.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It very much makes sense. I think from my point of view, even listening to that story, where I start diverging is I think we need more of them, and that there is a plurality of them available that we haven't accessed yet.
And we need more of them from disenfranchised voices.
That was obvious where I was going next.
Yeah.
And I'm more interested in unearthing more of those than I am helping to solidify the ones we already have and know about.
Yeah, to talk about female empowerment and related to Aphrodite and stuff again and again and again and again and
different kinds of journeys we haven't let enter the culture as strongly and solidly as we have the ones we know about. I think that's a worthy enterprise to go and recollect more, open up the ones we have to possibly different interpretations, if it's okay to say that. But I don't think that's a point of disagreement. I think we're both interested in that kind of spelunking.
I was hoping this was going to be more of a fight,
I know,
but all right.
Sorry.
Oh, we're short on time.
I told you I wasn't.
You said that, and I love this quote from you, you said the membrane between fiction and nonfiction is thin as an infant's skin. And I've talked about this for a while. I talk about this with my students in my critical thinking class when I talk about the whole sort of body of knowledge that we try to and even saying that is ridiculous, right? that we try to introduce students to. And when you go into a library, and so many of these things are not about what things are, it's about how we label them and categorize them. We have a very definite category called fiction, which is things we know we're making up. But then the other stuff is called nonfiction. It's not called fact. It's not called truth.
Which we're also making up.
Which we're also making up, right? And so can you talk a little bit about that? What you mean by that memory?
Where I'm at with that question, because in the last 6 years I've been asked that question, what's the difference between fiction?
Yeah.
It's more than you could possibly imagine. And my new answer is I am no longer interested in that question.
Yeah.
The place I'm interested most is in the interplay between the two, which is always active in either.
It goes back to that plurality and singularity
There
thing.
is no fiction without nonfiction. There is no nonfiction that does not also imply fiction.
There is no fiction that does not arise from our actual lived experience, and there is no nonfiction that is not constructed. I saw an article recently that said our memories are rewritten on a regular basis. We're actually
every time you remember, you change it.
And so if it's a memory from when you were a child that you haven't remembered since that time, it's actually more...
A little bit pure,
a little
quote,
closer
unquote,
to whatever quote unquote was perceived at the time.
Or if you listen to Eric Kendall in his book In Search of Memory, technically speaking, the safest memories are locked in the minds of those who have lost their memory.
Oh wow!
Which you can go think about that.
It's very Oliver Sacks.
It's very awesome.
In our closing minutes here, I just have two final questions for you. I couldn't get out of this interview without asking you. You have a box of hair.
I have a box of hair that's. Boxes, wooden boxes with beautiful layers of pastels in them. I took the pastels out and put in collected hair. Why?
And you take the hair out?
I don't take it out.
Okay.
It's just in there. I have a little bit of a hair fetish.
That's fascinating to me. I saw a story about a guy in Turkey that has like a basement catacomb that people come in and they sit in the chair and he takes a lock of their hair and just hangs it on the wall.
I haven't yet ritualized it. Maybe when I get a little older I can start talking people into that.
That would be cool. And just have our hair room at the house.
Yeah.
I would like that.
I'm for it.
In closing, you've been very gracious. Thank you for sitting with us. I could talk to you for another hour, but for your sake and for the audiences, I'm going to try to stick closely to our timeline that producer Mike is cracking the whip that I already blew by 20 minutes. But I just, at the end, it's not so much a question as a statement I wanted to make. Your son Miles, I went through a difficult divorce about 10 years ago, and my children were 8 and 6 at the time, my son and my daughter, and I love them to death, and we have a close relationship, but the divorce was very painful, and what led to the divorce was a lot of pain, both in my life and in their mother's life. We've moved through a lot of that and work very well together as a family now, but it wasn't always so. And there was a few years there when I was, and I'm still learning, but I was really trying to learn how to be a dad. I wasn't taught how to be a dad by my own father.
Me either.
And then I thought, okay, I'll figure it out in the confines of this family.
Yeah.
Right. And then that blew apart.
Yep,
and and so then I was kind of terrified. I would be with my children and I loved them and thought they were fantastic, but didn't know how to be a dad around them, didn't know what to do when they were in the room. And I would go on Facebook and I would watch you gush about this child, about Miles, and just your level of love for him, your level of acceptance and celebration of the person that he is. And it would inspire me. And I would go, I gotta go be like this around my kids. And then I would go to my children and I would be shy and I would not know how to communicate that love and that level of celebration of who they were. And then I thought, fuck, how am I going to do this, right? And then I'd go and I'd read another post that you would write, just simple things about just how captivated you are with the person he is and who he's becoming on a daily basis. And then I would go back to my kids and fuck, I don't know what to do. And finally, what I did was the only thing I know how to do, which is talk. Yeah. And I said, I got this friend, Lidia, and she's got this son, Miles, and she's always posting these things about how she celebrates him completely and loves him completely. And I feel exactly the same way about you, and I don't know fully how to show it, but if you're willing to work with me as I learn how to be your dad, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm at, and that's where I'm heading. And we didn't have a bad relationship, but it revolutionized my relationship with him. And I wanted to personally thank you for that. I've never told you that, but you made me be a better dad.
That's so beautiful. Any effort made by any kind of parent to discover the identity of their children is so beautiful to me. I think you're an amazing father.
Well, thank you very much.
I've met you, so I'm not speaking out of my ass when I say that. Miles, you have to let me say this.
You please.
The only things I've learned about being a mother, I come from him. He's my source. I trust him. Everything my culture told me was a bunch of bullshit. But he has shown me what a mother is, daily. And I trust his version of things more than I trust the world.
The culture tells us that mothers are conscripted to a life of kind of thankless servitude and delayed gratification and relational integrity in a lot of ways.
If you become that, which many, many men and women do.
Yeah.
But doesn't have to be that way.
Doesn't have to. Thank you so much for talking with us.
My complete pleasure. You're such a hoot to talk to because you're so smart.
Is there anything, likewise, is there anything you want to add before we close?
No, but we should sit down again someday.
I would love to. We'll talk about the mouths of others. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to, I almost said to the mouths of others. That's our other podcast you've been listening to On the Block Radio with Andy Gurvich. Our guest has been Lidia Yuknavitch. Thank you for being here, Lidia. Thank you to the Tao of Tea and to their lovely owner and manager, Yvonne, and to the Lansu Chinese Gardens here in beautiful downtown Portland, Oregon. Check us out on the web, folks, at www.ontheblockradio.com, where you can also follow our movements on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our new episodes drop every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We will see you down the road. Thanks for being a part of the program.
You've been listening to On the Block with Andrew Gurvich. The show is produced in Portland, Oregon by Michael DiNapoli at MD Productions. Theme music by Cat Power. Closing music by Jonathan Oak. Look us up on the web at ontheblockradio.com, where you can also link to us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to tune in next week for a brand new episode. Previous episodes can be found on our website. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you're beautiful kitty kitties. Oh, look at you out there. Beauty like a bolt, light in a darkened hallway. New minds, looking at this world, at our lives, with the perspective of apocalypse children. Standing dusty in the barren highways, standing broken before the fathers who are meant to make us whole, but who only lied to us about what it meant to be a man, about what it meant to be a woman, about what it meant to be a child of this doomed age.